That's the sort of thing that if your players ever found out that was the case, then everything they played leading up to that point is meaningless, right? They're not going to find any meaning in anything else they did if they figure out that this paragraph is in this adventure. All right, hey, what's up, guys? I am the referee, Connor McCloskey, and here we review 5e adventures and talk about 5e adventure design. And today we're going to be taking a look at the Odyssey of the Dragonlords. This is the remastered version, so this just came out a few weeks ago. It was created by James Olin and Jesse Sky. The adventure portion, which is what we're going to be focusing on today, is 306 pages, and it's split really into two parts. So the first part covers levels 6 to 12, and it has approximately 220 adventure locations, individual rooms or spots on islands over the course of about 205 pages. And then the second part covers levels 13 to 20, and that addresses 140 locations over 111 pages. And the reason I say I think it's level 20 is in the beginning of the book, it seems as though the remastered edition is meant to top out at potentially level 17. It's a little hard to understand. But when you look at the latest portion of the adventure, the end portion of the adventure, it does say level 20 again. So not positive there, but 13 to 20 is definitely possible given the content here. And this is $35 currently on BackerKit, and was originally kickstarted. And as I mentioned, the PDF versions just dropped recently. So first off, before we talk about the design itself, some things I really like about the adventure: the locations and the stakes and the feel of the places in the adventure. They have a great mythic feel, very classical, a lot of travel through the sea, especially in the beginning parts of the adventure. It is different enough from your standards Dungeons and Dragons that it still feels familiar, but it is definitely a different genre of adventure. Great NPCs, a lot of the characters, that your players are going to really enjoy speaking with and interacting with. And part of that is that there's a lot of minor factions, a lot of little factions built into different islands and different regions and different cities that you can interact with, and it really fleshes things out in a way that will be, fun for your players to go and spend some time with. There are some great wandering encounters. They are fairly wordy, but I think it's important to have wandering encounters. There are sea-based wandering encounters and land-based wandering encounters, and it does the way that they address putting in the random encounters or the wandering encounters is not what I would necessarily do. They just basically say to sprinkle some in here and there whenever you feel like the adventure needs it. But they are there if you want to sort of have that ticking clock and apply some pressure to the adventurers as they're doing their adventuring. There are options there to use them. The magic items are very thematic, again, feel very mythic, but they are pretty mechanical. They have sort of a 3.5 feel, a lot of +1s, +2s, the ability to cast certain spells so many times per day. I would have liked a little more thematic, sort of loose magic items that just felt like something out of a legend, maybe a horn that when you drink wine out of it, you can talk to goats or something. I don't know, just something that didn't have as much mechanical impact, but, had sort of that legendary and more free-flowing feel to it. The monsters are even better than the magic items. The monsters, I think, are fantastic. Again, very thematic. They seem like they would be a lot of fun to run. There are some of them that seem like they're brand new stat blocks. Some of them that seem pretty close to a reskin, which I think is perfectly fine. I think that's a great way to do monsters, is to take something that is pretty close to the monster that you're looking for, and then just tweak it a little bit. And then there are some that are somewhere in between, where there's some amount of reskinning and just retheming, and some amount of complete uniqueness. So great stuff there. On the exploration side of things, so in the remastered edition, when I was sort of getting ready for this and was reading through this adventure, I went and got a hold of the first version as well. And to be honest, the first version, I was not impressed with the middle chunk of the adventure here, where you're island hopping. A lot of the islands had 1 or 2 locations. Did not seem like it was worth making an entire island out of. And in this case, with the remastered version, they have really fleshed out that portion, and it really helps a lot. There's a lot more exploration in the sort of 6 to 13 level range there. The islands are more fleshed out. There are maps added where there were not maps before. There are new dungeons inset in those islands, which I think is fantastic. And those dungeons also come with their own maps then to help flesh that out a little bit. It still feels very NPC driven throughout the early part of the adventure. And by that I mean, rather than having things for the players to discover and then go and follow up on and sort of explore their way through the adventure, there is a lot of go here, get this thing, kill this monster, report back to me, then the next part can happen, and then you report back to me again, and then the next part can happen, and then you have to go report to somebody else. So rather than being sort of player-driven and exploratory, which I know is almost certainly very difficult to do across this level range, it is pretty NPC-driven at points. And while the islands themselves have a great exploration mechanics and, as I mentioned, are very fleshed out, a lot of the dungeons are very minimal in their looping, so they're pretty linear, fairly small, and you're going to end up seeing pretty much all of the rooms in a pretty brief amount of time. And as long as you walk in a straight line and open the doors, you're going to see everything pretty quickly. So let's take a look at some of the adventure here, just to show you what I'm talking about. And I want to focus first on some of the map aspect for this exploration. So as you can see, fantastic maps. Here's the map of your boat that you'll be sailing around during this 6 to 13 portion. Very cool constellation based navigation through this part of the world. Basically you pick what constellation you want to steer toward, and that takes you to certain islands. Not how it works in the real world, but that's okay. We don't need it to work exactly how it does in the real world. The descriptions of the constellations are very long, but I am okay with that in this instance, just because a lot of it is background information, but you don't have to use it, right? It's there, it's available if you want to use it, but it's not a necessary part of that exploration. You can see a bunch of the random encounters there. And then we have our large map of the Gulf. So this is a good example, the Island of the Fates. I believe the original version of this had maybe 2 locations instead of, now it's been bumped up to 5. It did not have a map. Now it has a map, which is great. Scorpion Island here. I believe this, again, had 2 locations, may have only had 1 location in the original version, which was fairly disappointing, but you can see we have our centaurs here, a little faction. We now have 5 locations, and we have an added dungeon with a map, which is great. As you can see, fairly linear. The Tower of Praxis here is a high point, in my opinion. It is one of the larger dungeons. It has quite a bit going on. There's a lot of different people to talk to. There's a lot of sort of intrigue. There's monsters to fight. There's a few different puzzles, and I think is just overall sort of a high point of that beginning part of the adventure. Unfortunately, the second half of the adventure has almost no exploration. It's, in my opinion, is severely lacking. All of that island hopping and that early exploration in the 6 to 13 level range completely disappears basically in the second half. Information design, I think the adventure suffers pretty greatly in its information design, mainly because a lot of the way it's presented is almost like a stream of consciousness. It's like they're trying to anticipate what your players are going to run into next in a sort of timeline of the story, and they are just putting that next in hopes that you will run into it or you will need it at the time that it's arriving. There are a ton of headings and then subheadings and then more subheadings and then more levels below that. That again just seem like they're sort of guessing at which ones you're going to need first, but then that makes it very hard to go back and find and reference things because there's not a lot of sort of meta structure to it that makes it easy to jump around and reference, other than using like the table of contents or something like that. You're sort of trying to remember, oh, when did that happen in the story of the book, whether or not that is how it actually played out at your table. Also, rooms and events within those rooms break their information across columns, which is not a huge issue, but then it also breaks across pages, so it jumps from one page to the next, which makes things a little bit harder. And then it also, in my opinion, very detrimentally, sometimes breaks those rooms across spreads. So you'll have one spread open in front of you, and that information will start on one spread, and you'll have to actually be flipping pages back and forth to the following page, and then back again to be able to relay that information. I much prefer a control panel style design where you open up a spread, the 2-page spread, you open it up in front of you and you have what you need for that spot, whether it be a couple rooms or a region of the dungeon or a region of the world map or a particular island or a part of an island. Whatever you need, it's right there, and you shouldn't have to flip to the next page to basically continue the thought from that room. There are times when the read aloud itself is separated from its own heading by another subheading. So here we have the final boss of the final battle of the first part of the adventure, that 6 to 13 chunk, which is the main part of the original, Odyssey of the Dragonlords. And it's Kentamane Awakens. And so this is, the 100-foot tall ancient titan, every bit as terrifying as described in legends. And we have him awakening on one column on the left side of the page, and the actual read aloud text is up on the right top of the page, which, as I mentioned, not a huge deal. But the real issue is that it's broken before you get there by a subheading here, Sacrifice of the Five Gods, which probably doesn't need to be right here. It seems like it should be a little bit later, but the way that the formatting they had, they couldn't fit it up there, and they couldn't fit the read aloud down below, so they just dropped it in there. In reality, everything above that probably just needs to be shortened, and you need to find a way to get that read aloud where it needs to be, and then have that Sacrifice of the Five Gods later on. And we're going to come back to this Sacrifice of the Five Gods section because I think it is the worst paragraph in the entire adventure, and we're going to revisit it. And then the last one here for the information design, sometimes there's location keys within location keys, and there's events that break into the location keys. So you'll have room, and then there will be an event happening in one room, and then there'll be information about the monsters in that event in that room, and it just makes it sometimes very hard to keep track of which room we're talking about, which room those events are associated with, which rooms and events those monsters are associated with. There are times that it gets confusing. And there are also times, we're going to go to an example here in the second half of the adventure, where we have room keys breaking sort of into the other locations. So here we have the city of Odyssey. This is in the second half. This is a city that you have bombarded, basically, and had to go in here on a mission. and we can see our different locations there. And then immediately after that, there's another map, and which is a little strange, but that's all right. And we see why here in a second. It's because A1 from Odyssey starts on the page, and then we have A2, the Queen's Palace, and then we go to A2A, the Palace Gates. And that's where things start to get confusing, because then we go through the entirety of that secondary map, the Queen's Palace, with A2B and A2C, and it stacks through that way, so that by the time we actually get to A3 on the overland map, we have now crossed 6 pages of that entire Queen's Palace dungeon, and then we drop back to that city map with A3, the Temple of Narcissus. So just not fantastic if you're, trying to go from A2 to A3 and your players don't go into the Queen's Palace as part of whatever, beat of the adventure they might be undertaking at the moment. You're off by 5 or 6 pages from where you need to be and from where that map was much further back. Next, we have the location descriptions themselves. In my opinion, a lot of them are just way too wordy. This is definitely dungeon after dungeon and overland area after area. You need a highlighter for this adventure, and in my opinion, if I need a highlighter to run it, then what I really need is for the dungeon designer to go and highlight their own adventure and then just cut out all of that other stuff that you didn't highlight, because I probably don't need it, right? If I'm going to read through your adventure and I need to highlight it myself, just do that for me and get rid of all the other stuff, all the other wording, all the other phrasing. It's just, there's just way too much on the page for a lot of these locations, and some of it is just unnecessary information, right? We have unnecessary room history about rooms or information about rooms that we don't need to know when we're running the adventure. And same with some NPCs. This is just stuff that the players don't have a way of knowing or will never know. You could maybe argue that it might inform the DM's, presentation of that information. But again, once it's game night and I'm trying to actually run the location, I'm not going to be able to actually remember and process all that information. There's just way too much at a lot of these. So let's find an example here. So this is actually in the Queen's Temple, where we were just a moment ago. And we have some good examples here, I think, of just locations with just information I don't need. So let's go A2H, the kitchens. These rooms are used to prepare meals for Queen Helen and the other residents of the complex. Okay, why are you telling me that? I don't need to know how a kitchen works. I know what the kitchens in the Queen's Palace are for. 2 servants, lawful neutral commoners, are on duty here at all times. Again, this is, 3 lines. It should have been 1 bullet point. A2H, kitchens, bullet point, 2 servants, and have them doing something cool. Cooking something that is very garlicky and smells like cucumbers, or, playing cards, or finger jousting. Whatever they're doing, make it interesting, make it very brief. It doesn't have to be 3 sentences. I will say I like that they did not have read aloud text here specifically, because we don't need it, right? So there's just a lot of information that we don't need, and even when they're cutting stuff, there's still a lot extra that we still don't need. Next one, servants' quarters. Rows of bunks line the walls of this tower, simple and tightly ordered. In addition, the room contains storage crates, laundry barrels, and communal wash basins. I probably don't need that, but, that's not terrible. 3 servants, commoners, move about their duties. They freeze at unfamiliar faces. One will slip away. You can see, even when I'm reading it out loud, I'm skipping over a bunch of stuff that probably there's just extra words I don't need. Next one, A2J guard barracks. The central chamber hums with activity. A royal dozen guards occupy the space, some sharpening blades, others lounging over simple games of chance. Rows of bunks and lockers line the walls, and 2 staircases split the room, one rising toward the upper quarters, the other descending into the quieter depths below. That's pretty good, right? There's a dozen royal guards, they're doing stuff, it's giving you the layout of the room, that's fine. First sentence out of the read aloud, these barracks house the Queen's royal guards. So now you've told me we're in the guard barracks. There's a dozen royal guards that occupy the space, and then the very next sentence in the non-read aloud, these barracks house the queen's royal guards. It's just, you don't need to say it 3 times. The barracks reflect our recent ideals. Junior guards, still proving themselves, are quartered on the upper floor in the well-appointed rooms overlooking the gardens and training grounds. From what I could see, there was not a staircase on the map. Veterans live below in austere underground chambers that reinforce the city's reverence of humility and endurance. Also, could not find any stairs going down, but most of that paragraph I don't need. That entire paragraph can probably be cut. There are usually 4 Oresian monks on the main floor with another 3 on the top floor, along with Leandros in the basement. That's great. Just give me that. Okay. I don't need that entire paragraph above. The players will either find out from the second paragraph or they will never find out. Next on the location descriptions, there are some traps here and there. A lot of them do seem a little bit like gotchas, which, that is kind of the 5e style of traps. I'm not a huge fan of that. I know a lot of people just don't like traps because of that. It's a lot of, you roll to notice, you don't notice, you roll to avoid it, you don't avoid it, so now you just take damage. I prefer the more new OSR version of traps where they have a trigger and a threat, and you either show them the trigger and hide the threat, so they have to, figure it out, or you show the threat and hide the trigger. So maybe they're walking down a corridor and there's a knee-high copper wire and they see the wire and they don't see what it's going to do, so they need to, work their way around that. Are they going to trigger it? Are they going to try and find the mechanism? Or you can do the opposite, right? You can have, they're walking down a hallway and there's a slot in the ceiling and it looks dangerous, but you don't know how it's going to be set off. So then they can interact with that. Are they going to maybe stay off to one side and work their way around? Or again, try and figure out how it's going to function so that they can either disarm it or avoid it or what it is. So, trigger and threat, hide one, show them the other, and then have them interact with the adventure to try and figure out where the other one is and how they can deal with it, rather than it just being a die roll that just, saps HP or whatever else it may be. And then some locations, they're not super clear on how to run them. So, for example, for this location, we have a wolf den, and where it's K8. The map is labeled in Z's, so I'm assuming we're in Z8, which is up here in the upper right. But so K8, thick layer of filth covers the floor, stench of refuse fills the air, patches of grass and mud have been matted into beds by some sort of beast, enormous piles of half-gnawed bones are scattered throughout the room, picked clean of flesh. That sounds cool. The chamber is a den of Carpathos dreadwolves, but they're not currently here. That's fine, we find them a little bit later. Here's the cool part, grasping skeletons. The scattered bones are actually hundreds of skeletons that have been packed into the floor. They are the ancient victims of the vampires. As the party moves across the room, the skeletons grasp at the party's ankles with their bony hands. That's awesome. Each hero must make a successful DC 18 dexterity saving throw or be restrained by a skeleton. Okay. Once a skeleton has restrained a hero, it tries to drag the hero into the bone pit. So here's the issue with this. It takes 2 rounds, and it can be prevented by destroying the skeleton. This is a level 15-ish, maybe level 14 area of the adventure, right? So we have multiple level 15 adventurers. We'll say even 3 out of 4 of them, because it's a fairly high DC. So we'll say 3 out of 4 characters get grabbed, and now they have 2 rounds to kill maybe 3, maybe 4 skeletons. They might be restrained, right? So that might hold them up a little bit. But, I mean, that's going to be no problem whatsoever. That's not even a speed bump. But then the next issue is, if the skeleton succeeds, the hero must hold their breath or they begin to suffocate beneath the bones. Suffocation in 5e takes a long time. Again, we're level 15, so even the folks who maxed out their main stat way earlier in their adventuring career probably have at least a +2 to their constitution just to bump their HP up. So we're talking like 3 minutes or like 30 rounds of combat for them to what? I don't know. Maybe kill a skeleton If it's 30 rounds of combat that they have to hold their breath to kill a skeleton each, that's, again, not really worth running out that way. Or do they have to fight hundreds of skeletons? In which case, I don't really know how to run that end of it either. So I don't know what to do there, right? Are they holding their breath for 30 rounds? If they kill the first skeleton, can they leave? If their friends are trying to help them during that time, are they still getting grabbed by other skeletons, right? Is this like a continual ongoing thing where they're just constantly getting grabbed by skeletons and have to figure out how to deal with it? It just seems to me like the kind of thing where I'm going to end up halfway through this room and realize that I don't actually know how to run it, even though it sounds cool, right? I like the room, I like the idea. It's either way, way, way too easy, or it's way, way, way too hard for me to actually run hundreds of skeletons all trying to fight them at the same time from the floor. So I don't really know where to go with that. Even though I like the room, I just don't actually know what to do with it. And then we come to my main complaint about this adventure overall, and that's that the second half just sucks pretty much across the board. There's basically no exploration, which I've already mentioned before. The first half has that island hopping, and you can sort of choose your own path and move around and meet people and go from place to place. But in the second half, there's basically no player-driven development of the adventure at all. You are told, hey, you need to go here, grab this thing, attack this person, kill this creature, whatever it might be. But there is no... there's nothing to discover that then the players decide this means we need to go and do the next thing, right? There's none of that. Also, it's completely disconnected from the first half. It reads like a sequel that basically did not really understand the first movie, right? And then they just came out with the sequel. It's like Cars 2 of mythic adventure design. And the locations and events themselves are all less interesting throughout the entire second section, in my opinion. That's probably more opinion based, but just in general doesn't have that same sort of mythic edge that the beginning does. And then the final push, that sort of what was 17 to 20 chunk that isn't sure if it's 17 to 20 anymore, is disconnected yet again. So like the 13 to 16 chunk ends, and then there's another final push that feels yet again disconnected, where you're basically just going around fighting giant monsters. And then when we finally get to the final battle, it's either villains we've already beaten in the first half, or it's a group of brand new villains that we have only barely met, only barely heard of, and don't care about at all by this point in the adventure. These people basically show up out of nowhere, and now they're the big bads of the entire campaign, and we have to deal with them. Also, I mentioned this with the Wolf Den we just talked about, but the maps are sometimes keyed wrong. They're missing keys. There's just, a couple different spots where it does not make a lot of sense, or it's hard to track where it goes next. Next point here, the intro adventures. So there are, now in the remastered version, there are 2 different intro adventures that you can purchase, either of or both if you want to check them both out. They're no longer part of the Odyssey of the Dragonlords, and the one that was originally part of the adventure was the Great Labors. And in my opinion, I only briefly looked at the original Great Labors, like I said, as I was looking through the older version of this adventure. But it seemed to me like a pretty good opening adventure, low level, but still had a good mythic sort of building toward epic feel. And I think that by cutting off that pretty good low level adventure, at least from what I saw, just looking through it quickly, and keeping all of that high level, basically level 13 and up, that I think it hurts the book overall. I think this book would be a much better book if it was the Great Labors and the 6 to 13 chunk of the Odyssey of the Dragonlords, and that was the adventure, and then maybe the high level stuff could be a bonus content, and then you could even have that second opening adventure as an option or something that you could add on. But I think by cutting off that beginning adventure and then keeping the high level portion, the book suffers for it. Also, this is not a big deal, but those beginning adventures aren't done yet. So if you did want to run this campaign, you would still sort of be waiting for those beginning adventures to be done before you could really start running the Odyssey of the Dragonlords. So the 6 to 13 and higher sections of the books are out, but those beginning ones are still being worked on. Again, not a big deal. I understand production needs to happen however it can happen. So, that's not a point against it. It's just something to note. So other thoughts overall, the adventure has a lot of hunting for MacGuffins. I mentioned this a few times. The opening section does have quite a bit of potential exploration, but there is a lot of check in with the NPC. Go here and talk to this person. Check in. Go here and find this thing and hunt this beast and kill this other guy, and then come back. A lot of tracking down magic items that you need to do to progress the story forward. A lot of extra just sentences and paragraphs all over the place. I've already pointed out some of them, but honestly, the book could have been half the length. Even if you kept all of the content, you could have cut the book in half. And then if you had cut off that top chunk, this entire thing could have been a third the length and better for it, I think. So I'm going to pull one of my favorite examples of this here. So we're on page 219. We're early in the second chunk of the book, and we have War Without End. Read the following to your players. Right before the read aloud text. We are on page 219 of this book. Why do you have a sentence here that says, read the following to your players? It's just some silly things like that. And then look at this read aloud text. There's just so much here. And again, this is the second half that I'm not a fan of, but there's just read aloud and quotes and read aloud and quotes. And then if we go to the next page, it's just more quotes and read aloud, and it just keeps going. There's so much text here that would make it very difficult to actually, in my opinion, run this segment of the adventure. I cannot sit here and read this much read aloud to players. You're going to lose them. You have like maybe 30 seconds, maybe 100 words if you're very lucky and you have very attentive players that want to hear what you're saying. If you start reading through all of this, you're going to start losing players. Also, this is, in general, it's an adventure path, and I'm not a fan of adventure paths. I don't think it's a good adventure structure. I know a lot of 5e adventures end up this way. I know, Pathfinder adventure paths obviously end up this way. I think it's a poor way to structure an adventure. I understand that, for something that spans so many levels, there needs to be some amount of progression in a certain direction just so you can write the rest of the adventure, right? But I think the constant need to complete the next step appropriately and check in before you can, cash in the token and move on really damages it. There is a very good concept, in my opinion. It's actually a blog against the Wicked City. And they had a blog post that I'll put in the comments, or I'm sorry, put in the links, where they talk about new school time, like an adventure path in time, versus old school location, right? And the idea is that you can take an adventure path. You could take this entire adventure, especially the 6 through 13 chunk of it, and then do it again later for the later chunk. And instead of having it be a timeline, have it be broken apart and it's all happening at the same time, and the players can hear rumors of it, or it's happening, more staged, but closer together, where one thing leads to another, and they can hear that things are happening and that the world is sort of adapting and changing, and depending on what they deal with, maybe other things occur without them having a chance to address it, and maybe they go somewhere that outlevels them, and all of a sudden they're in over their heads and they need to retreat and figure out how they're going to deal with that problem. But by taking that timeline and breaking it into a world, you enhance that exploration, right? You make it more available for them to go different directions without having the sort of token system of needing to make sure they check each box before they're allowed to explore the next part of the adventure. All right, and last bullet point here, I'm going to circle back around to it. because it is worth circling back around to. And it is my least favorite part of the entire book, which is a shame because it's in one of the coolest parts of the book overall. It's in the final battle for the city. In the first half of the book, you have, at this point, you fight the Titans that you've been battling the whole time or allying with. And then at the end of it, that ancient Titan over 100 feet tall, every bit as terrifying as described in legends, erupts from the ground and starts attacking the city. And depending on how well you do against this Titan and the allies you have to bring to bear, that decides how destroyed the city becomes. And then we have this in the bottom left, the sacrifice of the 5 gods. If it seems like the city might be completely destroyed, then Valis or Kira will sacrifice themselves to drive the Titan back. So if the players are going to fail, if they are not going to succeed at the game, then 2 of the gods that they have been working with against the Titans will literally win for them. Actual Deus Ex Machina built into the adventure. If it seems like one of the heroes might be killed, then Vulcan or Pythor will intervene at the last moment and intercept the killing blow, dying in the process. Again, if one of the players is going to die because of either the amount of allies they were able to muster or the way that they were playing in the battle, or the tactics they used, or the grander strategy that they tried to bring to the battle, then one of these 2 gods will intervene and will save the player. So your players cannot fail and cannot die, at least the first 2 of them that are going to die. The only reason that this would not tank my score of the entire review is because the people who are going to play this way are going to play this way anyway, whether or not this paragraph was in here, and the folks like me are not going to play this way regardless of whether or not this paragraph is in here. But what are we doing at that point? Your players cannot fail, so they're going to succeed, and they cannot die, so they're going to live. So why are we having the final battle? Why are we having everyone spend their time doing this? Just tell them what's going to happen if that's how you're going to do it. The only reason to play out the battle at that point is if you're tricking them into thinking they could fail or they could die when that's not true. In which case, they're not actually playing the game they came here to play, right? They put in all of this effort through the good part of this campaign, building up all of this momentum and allies and planning whatever their plan of defense is for this city, and none of it mattered because they can't fail and they can't die. They're just going to win and they're going to live. Why not instead let them potentially fail, right? And then that city's destroyed and they need to help evacuate those citizens to the next city on the list of the Titan, whatever that may be. Or let one of them heroically sacrifice themselves and actually die and become a hero of the adventure, right? Or even if you wanted to go the revival route, then have them actually delve back into the underworld and, go the Hercules route and have them actually need to save the soul and bring them back out or something like that. Anything is better than just having an NPC auto-win the battle and the adventure for them and automatically save them. That's the sort of thing that if your players ever found out that was the case, then everything they played leading up to that point is meaningless, right? They're not going to find any meaning in anything else they did if they figure out that this paragraph is in this adventure, and that's not a good way to write an adventure. So besides that, overall, I am giving this 6 out of 10 stars, which is basically, I would potentially run this with some significant changes. The main change being I would just cut off everything after that final battle in the city. But the 6 through 13 chunk of the adventure is, in my opinion, fairly good. I think I would have to take a highlighter to the whole thing, which is not how I like to run it, but it does have a very cool, unique mythic feel. Overall, I think I would consider running this with some pretty significant revisions. So that is it for this review. Next time we will be looking at Skeleton Key, which is a 17-page first-level adventure by Kobold Press, actually written for Tales of the Valiant, which is a 5e offshoot. So, should in all aspects be pretty compatible, but we will check it out next time.